Hello and welcome to the Este shirt Sew Along. So the Este shirt is one of the newest patterns from Atelier Jupe, and Atelier Jupe are one of my favourite designers of patterns and of fabrics. So when I saw this shirt I was instantly dying to try it because I think they make really good patterns in terms of tops. I've had great success with my Frida blouse, my Olivia blouse, my Emma blouse, all of which I've done sew-alongs for, and now it was turn to do the one for the Este blouse, or the Este shirt. So the Este shirt is described as, and I'm reading from the Atelier Jupe description, it is a pattern that allows you to make two versions of a button-up shirt. It's an oversized model with dropped shoulders. It's got a back yoke which has a pleat in it, and you can choose between a classic shirt collar or a lapel collar, and in between long sleeves with cuffs or a wide short sleeve. The front and back facings are included for the lapel collar, and they've made a couple of different versions. And I was instantly attracted to this fabric, but in this version. So what we see on the front cover is the long sleeved and classic collar version, and what I have made is the short sleeved lapel collar. So the sleeve where it's attached is down here, so it is very drop shouldered. It's a lapel collar, so this facing on the inside is part of the collar, and then we've a separate collar up here, and then we have some little buttons coming down the front. At the back we have a yoke, and we've got a pleat detail here. I hope I got that in. It is quite oversized. I've just tucked it in at the front, so if I take it out you'll see that it's got a curved hem on it, and it is quite big. So in terms of sizing then, when I make Atelier Jupe, normally I make a size 36, and I always find that that fits me pretty well, all depending on the kind of shape and fit, obviously. So I measure to 38, and I think I fall right into the measurements of the 38. But I do find in their blouses I'm quite narrow shouldered, so what I generally do then is I make a 36 on the shoulders and I grade out to a 38 at the hip. So that works really well now for the Frida, the Olivia and the Emma, so they're just a kind of a sleeker look, I guess. So in terms of this blouse then, I was dithering on what size, and I just thought, I'm going to make a straight 36 because there's a lot of ease around the hip, and I knew that it would fit me on the hip. But to make this again, I'm definitely going to go down a size, and that's only for me personally because I find it just feels too big. It just generally feels too big all over. So I definitely will size down. So seeing as I've made a 36, I may size down to a 34, and I may take it in a little bit more as well, but that's just me. But this is the overall look, so it is roomy, it's slouchy. You can make it in like a lot of different type of fabrics, so it's suggesting that you make it in light to medium weight fabrics like viscose, cotton, tencel, linen or polyester if you like that. I personally think that polyester is probably the best choice because it'll drape better. I think possibly a cotton version, definitely a poplin, or that it might be just too kind of stiff, and I really feel it needs to drape. So I kind of feel that if you made it in cotton it would just cock out the sleeves just a little bit too much. But overall it's a really cute shirt. I've made some changes in my sew along as I normally do. I've made a burrito style yoke at the back, so I don't personally like back facings. So the pattern automatically comes with the front facing, which is here, and then a little short back facing. I don't like those. When you put them on, they kind of get caught, they come up out through the collar, you know what I mean? So I made it with, I cut out two yokes. You'll see that in the sew along, and I've shown you how to do the burrito version with all the collar enclosed. And I used the method from the Friday Pattern Company Donny shirt to do that, so that worked out really well. The other change I made to it is only a small little change. I've actually put 5 buttons down the front rather than 4, because they're suggesting 15mm buttons, and again, personal choice. I don't really like 15mm buttons. I used to always use 15mm, but now I'm just finding them too big, so I've used a smaller button and I've just put more of them in it. So very simply that. So I think that's all the details. I'm just looking at it here. So yeah, I think that's all the details. So I hope you enjoy the sew along, and if you have any questions, pop them into the comments below, or if you have any questions that I can't answer in the comments, just pop me an email to hello@beyondthepinkdoor.com and I will get back to you. So let's crack on with the sew along. So I am here with all the pattern pieces for my ST shirt. Number 1 is the front. So we're cutting 2 of these. We have some important marks. We have a notch mark here at the sleeve, and we have one here at the neck, and we've marks for our buttons. Number 2 is our back, and we're cutting 1 on a fold. Again, we have some important marks. We have one here where our little pleat is at the back, and we have double marks here to balance up our sleeve. Here is our front facing. I always like to write the instructions on the pattern piece, and we're going to cut 2 of these, and we're also going to interface. Here we have our back facing, so we're cutting 1 on a fold. Now, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm not actually using this pattern piece, but you'll see all that in a second. Next one is we have our short sleeve, because this is the version that we're making. Again, we have our 2 marks here that match up to our back armhole. We have our middle balance mark, and we have our front notch for the front. And we have a slightly wavy hem, so that's interesting. Now, what you will notice on my pattern pieces is I've printed out my size, so I have a second line of marks, and that basically shows me the seam allowances. So you can see here the hem of it looks like 3 centimeters, and the seam allowance everywhere else is 1.5. That does change around where the neck is. So around the neck there's only 1 centimeter of a seam allowance, and you'll see that on the yoke pieces and the front and back pieces. So this is our yoke piece. Now, if you're following the pattern, you're cutting 1 of these on a fold. I like to fully enclose the yoke on my shirts and blouses, so I'm actually going to cut 2 of these on the fold. We have our pocket, and we have our collar. So what I'm making is the lapped collar, the lapel collar, sorry, excuse me, the lapel collar. So this is the piece that I need, number 11, and we're cutting 2 on the fold, and we're interfacing just 1. So they are all the pieces. I have my fabric, my interfacing, my reel of thread, and I've actually got 5 buttons. Now, it shows on the pattern instructions that 4 buttons are sufficient, but it's looking for bigger buttons, and I prefer personally a smaller button, so I'm going to use 5. So I am making the version of the lapel collar. So the first thing that I have to do is I have to make a little change to the pattern. So the one front does the two different styles, and just to prepare this we have to take 3 centimeters off the center front here. So we can mark 3 centimeters in. I'm going to make a couple of marks and then I'm going to join up that line and trim it off. So if you want to make sure that you are taking off the correct amount, you can get your front facing and you can put that around the neck here, and basically there's a gap here of 3 centimeters between where the edge of the facing is and the edge of the pattern. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Now I have all my pieces pinned out, so I have my fronts, my back on the fold. I've got one of my yoke pieces there, and I am going to cut that one and then cut the second one here. I think my camera is focusing on my finger, so we'll go. There's my yoke piece, second one there. I have my sleeve here. I have my collar there on the fold, and I have my facing piece here. And when I cut out, I'm going to cut out all of my pieces very carefully, but for my yoke piece here and my collar piece there, I'm just going to cut roughly around them, because I'm going to actually fuse a larger piece of fabric and then cut them out on the fused piece, and I find that that gives me a much more accurate finish, especially using viscose that can be a little bit on the floaty side. I'm between minds whether to put the pocket. I don't really personally like pockets, so I've just left that sort of there at the moment. So as you can see, there's lots of room to cut out the second yoke there in the center. But I still don't think I would have got away with less fabric in the way I had to lay it out and put the yoke there. So as you can see here, I've just very roughly cut out a piece of fabric for the interfacing piece. I'm going to fuse the interfacing onto the back of this fabric and then actually cut out the pieces then. I've also got a piece of fabric here for the collar. I've cut one out and I'll cut the next one then out of this piece once it's fused. So here is my fused piece of fabric for my collar. So I am very simply going to fold it in half because I need a folded edge. And then I pin it on and I cut out as normal. And I just find that this gives me a better finish because I do find that, particularly with viscose, by the time you cut out the viscose piece of fabric, you cut out your interfacing, you interface it on, and then you go and put your second piece on top when you're making your collar. The interface piece can be slightly out of shape. So this works for me. Okay, so even though I'm not a big fan of pockets, I have to remember that this is a sew-along, so I have to show you things. So here's our front piece, our pocket. We've got 2 marks here and here to show where the top of our pocket is going to basically fit in. Just hold it down the top of that there. And what I'm going to do is get 2 pins and pop them in like so to show on the front. I've done this already, so this should work. I'm going to put just one pocket piece, or one pocket, so I'm going to take off this one underneath, pop it to one side, give this a shake, and hopefully my pockets won't fall off. Okay, now I'm straightening up my grain line, and here is my pocket. So essentially then, when my pocket is on, it's going to be here. So I'm going to line it up there. Now I'm going to pin that in place because I want to show you how I cut a piece of fabric so that we have an invisible pocket. Now it's actually quite easy on such a big piece like this. So what I do is I'm going to put little marks here, just showing the different elements, so where they land on the fabric. Now you could do this with tracing paper, and then you could basically trace the whole pattern. So just anything that is quite key. So I could just colour that bit in. I think that gives me enough. Oh, here's a few other bits. Okay, and then the next thing to do is find a piece of fabric which matches up. So there we go. That's a piece. I think you can see the pattern piece underneath. Just about see it there. So then what I'm going to do is take this off. Keep that close so I can actually see it. And then grab my piece like this. And then lay it so that all my marks basically match up. Well, that seems to work. And then I had folded down this piece, so fold that back up. And then I'm going to cut out my pocket. You can see your seam allowance around the pocket is 1 centimetre and then 3 at the top. So in theory this will work. There's always a stray thread to throw you off. Okay, I'm going to cut that out and I'm going to press in my 1 centimetre and my 3 at the top. So here's my pocket with 3 centimetres at the top and my 1 centimetres around. Let's see, is this going to work? Okay, I'm definitely considering that to be a win. There we go. So to prepare my pocket, I'm going to overlock my edge. I may overlock all around actually. And what I'm going to do with the top edge is I'm actually going to turn it to the right side, so right sides together. And I'm actually going to sew that 3 centimetres up there, and that'll give me a nice tidy edge. Now this is how it looks, so it's sewn down on both sides, and then we're going to turn it out. I'll poke into the corners to make it a little bit better. Oh, that turned out pretty good actually. And then I'm going to sew across there, and then we'll pin it in place and stitch our invisible pocket in place. So I have pins all around, and I'm going to sew quite close to the edge to secure it in place. So there's our pocket, quite chuffed with that. So I've grabbed the second front piece, and I've also grabbed one of the yoke pieces, and we're going to pin and sew our shoulder seams together. So we have a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance here. So here's how we're looking. I have not overlocked it because it's only going to be enclosed in the yoke, and I've pressed the seams into the yoke, so we'll pull them out of the way for the moment. Now grab your facing pieces, and as you can see I have overlocked the long edges, and then grab your other yoke piece. Actually, it'd be easier if you grabbed your yoke piece and then your facings. And then what we're going to do is we are going to pin here. So you can see it doesn't cover it all, but that's perfectly fine. So we're going to pin them in place and sew at 1.5 centimetres of our seam allowance. So we'll do that. And this is how it looks. So you can see this time again I have pressed it into the yoke, and I've also pressed down the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance here in a fold, so we can leave them out of the way again for the moment. So then grab your collar pieces. You can see on your pattern piece or refer back to your booklet and you'll see that our seam allowance this time is 1 centimetre. So I like to place the interfaced piece down and then put the non-interfaced piece on top. And then keeping the raw edges even, we are going to pin around. So as I always say, as few or as many pins as you like. I like few, you might like many. And you can see here we have this little shape, so we're going to sew from the edge up and then over. So we're going to follow the edge of the pattern. So this is how it looks once it's been sewn. I've clipped into this spot here and I've taken off, just snipped off the point there, and now I'm going to turn it right sides out, give it a press. This is a good time to check that you have done your notches, so you should have one there and one along here. Now grab your fronts that are attached to the yoke piece and then grab your collar, and the right side up of the collar is the piece that's interfaced. So you should have a notch here on your neck and here, and then you have your notches on your collar. So your notches on your collar are lining up your seam. So putting everything flat, I'm going to grab my notch and pin it to my seam between my front and my yoke. And I'm going to pin my collar to that notch. I'm going to find my way over to the next notch and pin it here at the seam. And then bring the edge of the collar over to this notch. And then we'll pop a couple of pins in here at the back. Now I'm going to baste that in place with a sewing machine, so not too far away, maybe half a centimetre in from the edge. I'm going to sew those 3 layers together, so the 2 layers of the collar and the 1 layer of the shirt. So there you can see my basting line. And check underneath, so on the wrong side, just check to make sure that your shoulder seam is still ironed in the right direction, and your other one, sometimes when you're sewing it can turn back, or some of it can turn back. And also make sure that you don't have any little tucks that you don't want, because that can happen as well. Then give it a little shake, and then grab your other yoke, which is attached to the front facings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sandwich them all together. So we're going to grab our front facing, and where this seam is on the yoke, we're going to line it up with the other one. Pop a pin in there. We're going to match up the other seam as well. Pop a pin in there in the middle of the back, keeping the raw edges even. And then we're going to work our way over to the edge here. So this is the lapel of our shirt. And then we're going to sew using our seam allowance all the way across to the end. Now let's just double check what the seam allowance is. It's a centimetre, because I can see it on the bottom there of the collar. So I'm going to pop in another couple of pins, and I'm going to start here, and I'm going to sew all the way across to the end. So this is how it looks, and I've also clipped into that seam, so maybe 1.5 to 2 centimetres apart. I've done just little clips, making sure not to clip my stitching. And then the next thing we're going to do, and this is going to definitely feel a little bit strange, is we're going to lay out our front. And when we lay out the front with the facing on top, we'll see that our facing is 1.5 centimetres short of our front. And this is not a mistake. You haven't cut it out incorrectly. This is another one of those lovely little features that I like from Atelier Jupe. So what we're going to do is we're going to lift up our facing, and we're going to pin it so that the raw edges are even between it and the raw edges of your hem. And then we're going to sew across there at a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and we're going to do that on both sides. So we have our little seam sewn there at the bottom. So we are going to pin our facing to our front, keeping the raw edges even. And then when we come to the bottom here, we'll have 1.5 centimetres. And we're going to sew with that seam push down to the hem. So we're going to sew up to the top, and we're going to do that on both sides. So this is how it looks. We've got our lapels here. We've got the double yoke, and I've everything pressed down, and this is what your hem looks like at the moment. So doing it that way gives it a really nice clean finish at the end. So we'll pop them to one side for the moment. Grab our back piece. So where's the bit I want? Here it is. So the top part here, we've got 2 notches, and we've got our center back. I know where the center seam is because there is a crease line in it. So what we're going to do basically is pinch the notch, bring it to the fold, pinch the notch, bring it to the fold, and then we've got a lovely pleat. The first thing I'm going to do now is sew across the top here so that keeps it nice and together. So this is our front, and this is our top yoke here. So just separate the two of them and flick the under yoke out of the way. And then I have a little crease ironed here from when I was pressing before, and that's showing me the center of my yoke. And then grab your back and pin center to center, so into the center of the pleat we've just made, and then pin left and right. Again, keeping your raw edges even, and we're going to sew across here with 1.5 centimeters of a seam allowance. That's ready to sew. So here we are. This is the collar in the middle, and I've just basically spread the entire blouse out. The yoke is here. So I'm going to throw each of the fronts to the side, and then if you grab the back and just basically roll it up so it comes up to your collar, and that will then expose this seam. So this is the seam we've just literally sewn, and then we grab our other yoke and we're going to match up the raw edges, pin the centers. Again, I ironed a little crease there in the center. And then what I like to do is I like to sew across, keeping the raw edges together right on top of the row of stitching that I have just sewn. And this is how it looks. And basically what we want to do now is like birth the shirt. So we're going to grab and just pull everything through. And then what we'll be left with is a lovely, fully enclosed yoke. So I'm going to press that seam there. And then what are we going to do here about these shoulder seams? So we're all loose here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin the edge, the folded edge, to the stitching, and then I'm going to do a couple of top stitches along. So just a little bit of maybe a ladder stitch by hand, and that'll hold it in place. You could, if you wanted to, you could top stitch and then have the stitching showing on the other side. So I actually decided to top stitch, so I pinned everything on the inside and then I top stitched on the outside, and then that's how it looks on the inside. So the next thing we're going to do is just do some overlocking. So I'm going to overlock my side seam edges, and I'm going to overlock here around my arm hole, and I'm going to do that on both sides. Now, very simply, our next step is to put our raw edges together of our side seams and sew them with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So So I've sewn my side seams and I have pressed them apart. What I like to do then is just pop in a pin around the armhole to show where the little notches are, because of course they'll disappear once the overlocking has been done. So I've got one there at the top of my 2 notches for the back, and I've got one there. Now grab your sleeve. Again, check that you have your notches notched, and I'm going to overlock around the top and the sides. And what I do is I overlock across the top, and then I trim off my ends, and then I overlock the sides, rather than I have tried, it's very difficult to overlock up and then turn and go across. I always end up with like a corner there, which annoys me, so I do it in 3 passes. And then I am going to put my raw edges together, and I'm going to sew my side seam on my sleeves. Now we're ready to put our sleeves in. I have determined that this is the correct sleeve to put in here because I have my 2 notches there. So I'm going to pop my sleeve in. I'm going to put a pin here where the underarm seams match up. Then I'm going to pin my notches together. I'm going to pin my 2 front notches together. And then I have a notch up here, and that matches the yoke seam. Now we've got very little ease, so this is going to be quite easy to sew in. Just distributing the little bit of ease, it's not a lot. And again, put in as many pins or as few pins as you like, and then using your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So in the sleeve, I'm going to pin in the second sleeve now while I'm at it. And then we're on to doing some hems and some buttonholes. And then we have a beautiful shirt. The next step is to turn up a sleeve hem. So the hem on the end of the sleeve is made up of 3 centimeters. So it's a 2 centimeter hem and then a 1 centimeter in. So what I like to do is press up the 3 centimeters first, and then press down the 1 centimeter. And I found this really handy, this tool. It's got a 3 centimeter length here, it's got a 2 here, it's got a 1, it's got a 1.5. So they're all at really handy little intervals. So you don't even have to look at the whole 5, I think it's 5 or 6 there. So I literally turned up 3 centimeters, and then I used the 1 centimeter to turn one down, and then I top stitch then on the outside. So my top stitching is then about 2 centimeters away from the edge. On the hem then, because we have this little bit here started already, we can iron up or press up 1 centimeter, and then the hem is 1.5 centimeter. Now you do have to take your time around this because it's curved, of course. So I'm going to top stitch this next, and then my top stitching and my hemming is all done. Then I'm going to try it on, and I'm going to see where I want my first button to go. So I'll place my first button, and well, I'll do my hems and then I'll come back. So I've tried it on, and I've decided that I want my first buttonhole to be here. So what I normally do is I measure down almost to the end, and I make sure that it's an even number divisible by 4. So if I've got 5 buttonholes, I've got 4 spaces. So I have 36 centimeters here, so there's literally 9 centimeters between each one of the pins, and the bottom of the pin shows the bottom of the buttonhole. So I'll also measure in the same distance all the way down, and I will start my buttonhole at the pin and work up. And I'll do my 5, and then I'll put on my buttons, and then I have a wearable blouse.